everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff here for the dramatic conclusion of Unit 1. So by the end of the day, we will have talked about all the colonies that are setting up here as we move into our further units of how those colonies end up having beef with England and leading to America. All right, so yesterday we had started talking about the southern colonies, and we're going to methodically go through and kind of talk about each one of the southern colonies today before we finish off talking about mercantilism and basically what England expected from each one of the colonies or the colonies as a whole, and what in England's mind they felt the entire purpose of the existence of these colonies were. All right, so let me put myself up here in the corner. I want to start out here again today with a map. We looked at this map in previous lessons. So we got Maryland here. So Maryland is a southern colony. So Maryland is in the south. It is divided up like that because it is agricultural. They grow cash crops. At the time, the main one is going to be tobacco. They are selling some indigo. Cotton, not really until the cotton gin comes out around 1800. But it's going to be tobacco, it's going to be indigo, and there's actually some rice. And I actually sometimes hesitate to use the term rice all the time when talking about cash crops, since you can eat rice, but the vast majority of the rice that is grown here is being sold for money in order to buy the things that you want, is what a cash crop is. So the whole southern part of these colonies, which is going to be Maryland, Virginia, Carolina when we get there, because all of this right here is going to be one colony, and we'll talk about today why it splits. And then you got Georgia down here. All right, so Maryland, the furthest north one here, Maryland is going to be created for a place for Catholics to show up. All right, so Catholics really didn't have a place over here. There wasn't a lot of places that accepted Catholics, since a lot of people were coming over here to be Puritans or something like that. So Maryland passes the Act of Toleration. So the Act of Toleration says you can be whatever religion you want to be when you come over here, and you're more than welcome to come into Maryland as long as you're Christian, which would include Catholic. So you can be Catholic, Puritan, Pilgrim, Separatist. You can be whatever you want as long as you're Christian. Now, what happens, Mr. Wagstaff, if you happen to not be Christian and you try to move to Maryland? They'll kill you. Like, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, it's literally called the Act of Toleration. So we'll tolerate anybody unless you're not Christian. So if you're Jewish or Muslim or anything like that, we'll just put all those people to death. So you had to be Christian, but you could have whatever form of Christianity you wanted, and they called that the Act of Toleration, that we tolerate anybody here. So in the southern colonies in general, so it's decreed death to all those who denied the divinity of Jesus, like Jews, atheists, or anything like that. So interesting enough, relatively unrelated to any of the religion aspect, that the life expectancy in the South is about 10 years lower than the life expectancy in the New England or even in the middle colonies. A lot of that is because it's really hot in the South. So disease spreads much more easily in the South. There's also a much higher percentage of males to females, and males typically have up to present day have a lower life expectancy, in large part because of the "hey, watch this" mentality that us guys have a tendency to do, and we do dumb things. So not only that, but a lot of fighting and stuff like that will happen with the more aggressive societies that are male dominated, as far as like not necessarily in charge, but when there's more males, they end up doing dumber things. So the Act of Toleration in Maryland was basically tolerated any Christians, but was like extra aggressive to anybody that wasn't a Christian. So this is the Chesapeake Bay population. And you can see that the population in thousands is going to skyrocket. Black, which is going to be mainly slaves. There obviously were Africans or black people that were not slaves, but it was still a minority at the time. That black people, and meaning slaves, African slaves, is going up, and then the population of the Native Americans goes down. All right. So what allows the disease and tobacco to thrive more in the southern colonies than the New England colonies? It's the climate, it's the temperature. That's really going to be the biggest difference in the north, which is the north and the south. But the New England colonies and the south is the heat allows disease and tobacco to spread. So while you could probably grow tobacco in the New England colonies, which I'm sure they did at certain points, it couldn't compete with the quality tobacco that is grown in the south when you're trying to sell it based on the climate and the geography and the soil. All right. Bacon's Rebellion has nothing to do with bacon. All right. So here's what happens. All right. I got a picture here. Bacon's Rebellion. We'll come back to this. So Bacon's Rebellion is actually going to happen. Let me show you what this says here. Head right land grants in the 1700s. So Bacon's Rebellion is going to take place in Virginia. All right. However, the issue that is caused happened in basically all the states. The head right system was a thing that happened in all the states. Georgia has the most clear-cut example of this with this map here, so I'm going to draw on this map and show it to you. But this is what's happening in Virginia as well. So this land here, all right, all this orange land is part of the head right system, meaning so England wants more tobacco and more people to come over. So England creates this thing called the head right system, meaning if you as a rich plantation owner in America can, if you will bring people over from England and feed them and take care of them, and basically they're indentured servants. So they're like slaves for like 7 years, all right? That if you get indentured servants to come over, England will give you land for every single person that you bring over, all right? So that they could give you up to like 500 acres of land per indentured servant that you bring over. Because England can just give out land because it doesn't cost them anything. Like, oh, you have more land now. So they can give out this land. And so they're getting a bigger population over here, more people to grow tobacco. So they are making the profits because England's going to be the one that's going to be making the profit off the tobacco. So the head right system was the idea that the more indentured servants that you bring over, the more land you get as the plantation owner. Now, here's what's in it for the indentured servants that are coming over. So you're going to be coming over if you choose to be an indentured servant, and it is most of the time a choice, except in some unique situations. So you are signing up for being a slave for 7 years, all right? When you pack up and you come across the ocean, now it's really expensive to get over to the New World. But if you sign up as an indentured servant, the plantation owner that you're going to work for is going to pay for all that. So you pack up, you come across the ocean. When you get here in the New World, you go to work, and you have 7 years here to work for this plantation owner. After that 7 years is up, not only are you freed, he's required to give you 50 acres. Now, he probably made 500 acres off of you, all right? But he's required to give you 50 acres. So after your 7 years are up, you not only got a free ride over here, you had 7 years of work, and you probably learned a trade, learned how to grow tobacco or something, but now all of a sudden, you also are a landowner. So primogeniture, the other issues in Europe, this solves a whole bunch of them. So this is fantastic. Tons of indentured servants come over, all right? The plantation owners get really wealthy. Then all of a sudden, once you have some land, you could be bringing people over if you were the indentured servant. It works well for a while, all right? So it looks like there's not going to be a need for slaves because, hey, this indentured servant thing works great for everybody. Then some of the issues started. One of the biggest issues is the fact that it is a law. 7 years and they're free and they get their land, period. There were quite a few instances. I wouldn't say the majority. I don't know what your percent. If you're looking at 5%, 20%, how many would do this? They'd come over here, an indentured servant, like, yeah, I'm an indentured servant. Then they would just run away for 6.5 years. They'd go live in New England colonies or something. After 6.5 years, they come back and they're like, I want my land. My 7 years is up. I want my land. And the owners would be furious about this, but the law is the law. You had to still give them 50 acres of land. So there was some hostility by the owners already at these people that would come over and do this. But they dealt with it. Here's where it gets crazy, and here's what's going to lead to Bacon's Rebellion. So the land that was starting to get given to people, and I'm going to use Georgia here as an example. So this is Georgia. Even though Bacon's Rebellion is going to take place in Virginia, the same tension was happening in all the southern states. So all this area right here, all the yellow area, that's all the good land. All right, that's all the good stuff that you want. Out here, I put a little X's. We'll give that a different color here. How about we go with pink? All right. Well, these little X's, these are Indians. And they ain't happy about it. They ain't happy about people encroaching on their territories. And sometimes the Indians will run over here and they'll kill. Pink might not have been the best color. Run over here, kill a whole bunch of colonists, and then run back into their lands and ticks off a whole bunch of people. So the rich plantation owners get smart about this. We will go with blue. I'm going to use blue. So what they do is when it's time to give land out to the indentured servants whose 7 years are up, you know where they give them land at? Right here. They give them all this land here, all up and down this border is all the indentured servants' lands. They literally are giving them land to be, and I'll go back to pink here for the Indians, Operation Human Shield from the Native Americans that are trying to come in. So if the Native Americans decide to kill somebody, who do they kill? But the indentured servants who just got their land, and then that land goes back to the owner because of some of the laws, so they can just give it over again. It forces the indentured servants who've already spent like 7 years as a slave to basically defend the rich people with their lives. Not only that, there's a reason this land is empty. A lot of this land here, right up and down here, is because it's not really good farmland. There's a whole bunch of other land, other places that they could give them out that's better farmland, but who cares, all right? So these people here would be called the Eastern elites. These are like what the blue is. This is the indentured servants. Finally, the tension just gets super high because the indentured servants know what's up. They know what they're being. They're basically being left out there as bait to get sacrificed to the Indians if the Indians get mad. So what ends up happening is Nathaniel Bacon in Virginia rebels, and him and a whole bunch of other indentured servants come in here. I don't want to use pink. We'll use some blue for the indentured servants. They come in here, even though they're no longer indentured servants, they were at one point, come in here, and there's a big war that gets fought. It's a rebellion. It's not a war. It's a skirmish. But a bunch of people get killed. Nathaniel Bacon, he's fighting against the governor of Virginia because the governor's, which is the one that's allowing all this junk to happen. Again, I'm using the map of Georgia here because it's a pre-made map for this one. But the same tension's happening in Virginia. All right. So Nathaniel Bacon ends up being defeated. But a bunch of wealthy elite landowners that would be in this orange area had been killed. All right. If that was Virginia. So when that happens, there's a lot of plantation owners that are like, I don't know if I want to keep using indentured servants if they're just going to like snap and start killing everybody. So really after Bacon's Rebellion, and here's why we learn about it and why it's a big turning point, is after Bacon's Rebellion, the plantation owners really stopped using indentured servants because they realized that eventually the indentured servants are going to get sick and tired of being treated as second-class citizens once they are no longer second-class citizens. So after Bacon's Rebellion, it really makes a lot of the rich plantation owners too afraid to use indentured servants in case this happens again. So they're going to start just buying slaves instead of using indentured servants. So this is where the increase of African slaves in all the southern colonies is really going to take off, is when they start, is after Bacon's Rebellion, and there's a fear of the retaliation by the indentured servants once they're freed. If we just buy slaves, instead of having indentured servants, they never have to be freed, and they're never going to rebel because they'll never know anything. So Bacon's Rebellion is a rebellion that basically speeds up this process of the colonies in what is present-day America really starting to commit heavily to African slaves as the ones to do the work. And again, slave trade happened around the world, but the African slaves in the New World were the preferred slaves because they did not get sick and they did not die from the climate. Like, they had a much higher life expectancy as far as the percentage that don't get sick and die than even the Europeans that come over here. I mean, about half the Europeans will die when they come over. Africans, it's almost non-existent. So the ability to survive and thrive in this environment was a big reason why the African slaves are the ones that these plantation owners are going to use at the time. So the question here is, though Bacon's rebellion helped end indentured servitude, how did it lead to the use of more slaves? We talked about that in detail, so make sure you answer that in 2 complete sentences. Make sure, as always, pause me if you need to. All right, the Carolinas. So let me show you a map here. This is here, the Carolinas. So this here, all right, is North and South Carolina. All right, this whole area right here is North and South Carolina. Like, so North Carolina would come up right in here. Present day, I would draw a little line there if you can see it. Be more like right here would be North Carolina today. All right, so initially this is called the Carolina Colony. Now, what you really need to have whenever you create a colony is you have to have a deep water port. So they had one in Jamestown-ish, all right? So Jamestown will work, and then you're going to have New York City, and then you're going to have Boston. So the problem is once you start coming further south, you got the Outer Banks right here. Man, so many ships wrecked here. You couldn't even sail close to this whole region without sinking. So sure, it had a whole bunch of fertile farmland here in this top part of Carolina, but when you grow a whole bunch of tobacco, what do you want to do with it? Sell it. And you're trying to sell it to England. So if it's here, you got to march it way up here, or you got to march it way down here in order to sell it. So even though the land here was good to grow stuff on, nobody wanted to live here because it was like nearly impossible to ship your stuff because you'd spend so much money transporting your crops. So they keep coming down here in the Carolina colony until they find Charleston. Charleston, South Carolina is a very, very, very important city because it's a deep water port. It's the next deep water port they find. So Carolina colony, right here around Charleston, South Carolina, a whole bunch of farmers take place. And there's good soil down here, great for growing tobacco. So the whole area around Charleston, it's called Charlestown at first, it's called Charleston today, is a very rich area. All right, so you had to be really rich to live around here, and then to be a farmer around here, you're fine. However, if you were a really poor farmer and you wanted good land, you could move up here in the northern part of the Carolina colony, and you'd have great soil to grow stuff there. But every year, having to hoof that stuff back down to Charleston took forever. Very dangerous, Indian territory. It was just a real pain. And you had to spend a bunch of money to do it, and you're away from home for a long time because you had to do it with horse and wagon. So it just wasn't very cost effective. So the people that lived up here, they grew good crops, but they were very poor. All right. So Charleston is the capital of the Carolina colony. All right. Well, it ends up being, guess who the people in Charleston only care about? Is the rich people that are right here around it. All right. Let me make sure I'm not getting too far ahead here. So what ends up happening is Charleston's only looking out for the people that are nearby it. So the people up here in the northern part of the Carolinas are completely ignored. Like, nothing they want matters. They're just being completely discounted. They're going to end up finding, and this is a big game changer, further north of Charleston. Let's see if I think it's about right here. They do find another acceptable deep water port. That is Wilmington. All right. Once they discover Wilmington, there's 2 deep water ports. North Carolina, the northern part of Carolina, I should say, asked, like, hey, do you guys mind if we just break off and become our own colony, and we call it North Carolina? This way, since we're all poor people, we can kind of look out for each other, and then South Carolina can do their own thing and do their own rich people things. South Carolina's like, yes, please, you poors, get away from us. So South Carolina's cool with it. North Carolina likes it because they can look out for themselves. So it's not, there's not really any beef there, but there's just such two different cultures between the North and the South. And the South didn't care about anybody that lived up here. So once they found another deep water port with Wilmington, then they just decided to break off, and it made sense for everybody. So you still have to travel just as far, but New Bern is right in here. That was the first capital of North Carolina. New Bern, which is really near the coast, probably a little closer than that. New Bern is the capital of North Carolina and was looking out for all the people here in North Carolina. So that's why there's a split between North and South Carolina. Oh, I want to do this here. So small tobacco farms in the Northern Carolinas. Slavery existed, absolutely, and it's going to take off, but not in as huge of numbers as some of the other states like Virginia, in large part, and South Carolina. And it's not because North Carolina is morally superior at all. People in North Carolina would buy slaves absolutely if they could. North Carolina was just poor, and a lot of it had to do with the Outer Banks. It blocked you from trade. So North Carolina was generally a little poor and could not afford the same amount of slaves that some of the other states could, on average. So it wasn't a moral superiority in North Carolina by any stretch of the imagination. It was just a financial thing that slavery was not as common in North Carolina as it was other places. But hey, it wasn't like North Carolina ever tried to limit it or anything like that either. I'll put myself back up here in the corner. So 1712 is when the split between North and South Carolina are going to happen. So there's also this whole hunk of land here all the way out to the Mississippi River. So what is present-day Tennessee is going to be part of North Carolina. No, the Proclamation of 1763, which we'll talk about in detail in the coming units. This is the Appalachian Mountains, and nobody really went to the other side of the Appalachian Mountains because, again, the travel ability was a huge struggle. So the question here is, what was the reason for the split between Northern and Southern Carolina? I think we talked about that in detail, so go get 2 complete sentences on that. And feel free to pause me. All right, Georgia. Georgia's the last colony to be created. Georgia, so this guy named James Oglethorpe. Let me bring this back here. So at first, this is Georgia right here. This is the first part of Georgia. Georgia has a bunch of land. Nobody really wants to move down to Georgia. There's some problem. The Indians down here are getting more hostile. This right here, so Florida is all owned by Spain or France. So it's a little confusing. At this time, Spain owns all this. France and Spain are going to get in a war, and it goes back and forth, but it doesn't affect the colonies because nobody's moving down here into Florida. All right. Georgia is empty. Nobody really wants to move there, but there's a lot of good soil there for growing stuff. So now that people are moving away from indentured servants, England's like, how can we get more people over there to farm and then send their farming stuff back to us? And they're not going to hate it. So you know what England does with Georgia? It's a prison colony. That's what Georgia was. Georgia was a prison. If you're in jail over in England, let them out of jail. We don't have to feed them. We'll send them over to Georgia. You guys have to go live in Georgia now and be farmers. And I'm guessing the prisoners got the option of this. And they said, yes, please, I will go do that. So a lot of the people they send over here are not like murderers and stuff like that. Like Australia, that's how Australia got their start. It was more of a not nice people getting sent to Australia. A lot of the people sent to Georgia are going to be people who are in jail for debt. Like they haven't paid their debts, which is, I don't know how you pay your debt back when you're in jail. But so it's usually non-violent criminals that were sent over here to Georgia. But that is how Georgia got founded. James Oglethorpe is the one who had that idea. And so Georgia is founded off of criminals that got shipped over here. So you got North Carolina, South Carolina, and then Georgia will eventually spread out to be the size it is today. And then it's what is different about the creation of Georgia than the rest of the colonies. So go through and answer that. We talked about that. That's kind of a cool story. All right, life on the southern plantations. So it is a male-dominated society. So not surprisingly, the population in the South is not going to grow at the same speed as the North. Not only is, Jamestown and all that, we're all men coming over, but now we have fully functioning colonies now. So when families came over and lived in the South, you want to go start a plantation, that's fine. However, almost all indentured servants were men. So you have a massive population of men in the South versus women, and without women, the population doesn't grow at the same time, at the same rate. So the population was clearly higher in the North than it was in the South. In addition to that, these plantations that would get built in the South, these large plantations, they're spread out because a plantation is 500 acres. So your next neighbor is, your 500 acres, his 1,000 acres away. And it's just, there's no neighborhoods or anything like that. So the plantation, since they needed so much land and it had to be far away from everybody to accommodate that much land, there really weren't cities that existed in the South the way they are in the North. Now, yes, there's going to be ports. You're going to have Charleston. You're going to have Wilmington. You're going to have cities, but nothing like what the North is, where it's a very they're going to come together and have a lot of these urban areas with a lot of people packed in together. The South is just wide open, just rural, and it's going to be like that for hundreds of years after this, because the South is going to focus on agriculture and plantations, whereas the North is going to eventually start focusing more on manufacturing and building stuff and having factories. So very different cultures will grow between the North and the South, in large part because the plantations are going to prevent the idea of cities from growing. And that is the question here. How did having large plantations keep cities from forming? We had talked about that. So go through and answer that in 2 complete sentences. All right. Mercantilism. Big fancy word, which means you got to serve the mother country. So England, in their mind, while these colonies come out, in England's mind, who's just doing England stuff over in England, they're like, the only reason that those colonies exist is to benefit me, England. All right? They believe that the entire sole purpose of a colony is to benefit the mother country. If at any point they stop benefiting the mother country, bad things are going to happen. All right? Or more likely, they're just going to say no, and then everybody in the colonies are like, oh, okay. Because keep in mind, even though they're over here in what we call America today, they still consider themselves English citizens. If somebody comes and messes with the colonies, England shows up and defends the colonies. They are still English citizens. So in England's mind, the English citizens over there, their only goal is to try to benefit the mother country. What England's not going to be aware of is the changing culture that's going to be starting to take place in these colonies, where the colonies like to do their own thing for their own reasons and not be told what to do. So, under this idea of mercantilism, England thinks the colonies are just happy to be there. That's not going to be the case. The colonies don't complain because, more or less, England just leaves the colonies alone. So I have a little cartoon here. So, and this does really good. This is mother country. This is supposed to be England, mother England. These are the colonies that are just supposed to be bringing her raw materials, foodstuffs, gold and silver. Like, the entire purpose of the colony is to serve England. Now, the people in the colonies do not feel like they are subservient to England at all. And that's what we're going to talk about in large part in the next unit, is some of the issues that are going to come out with this different mentality of who's in charge here. So this is Britain's empire by 1713 is about where we're at here. These are the colonies and what England basically controls. And we will basically pick up from this point in our next unit. So the question is, mercantilism allows for the colonies to trade with only one country. Who is it, and why is it created this way? So again, we talked about mercantilism and what England's view of the colonies are. So answer that in 2 complete sentences, and And that is the end of this unit for the new lessons.